All right, welcome everybody. I've got the top of the hour, and I want to welcome you all to our From Research to Implementation webinar series. This month, our topic is pavement preservation in urban settings. So it's a really cool topic to me. I got the opportunity to work some with Dr. Adriana Vargas on this project that we've been partnering with ARA and the Federal Highway Administration on. So let me go ahead and introduce our guests. Today we've got Nathan Moore, as always, Dr. Adriana Vargas here with NCAT, and Bobby Bestold from All States Materials. So Nathan Moore is the Assistant Director for Test Track Research here at NCAT. He's responsible for overseeing all the test track research programs. Prior to that role, Nathan served as a laboratory engineer for about 8 years here at NCAT and specializes in balanced mix design and pavement friction. He holds a bachelor's degree and his master's degree, both from Auburn University in civil engineering, and he's a licensed professional engineer in Alabama. And he also is he is the #1 backup for his wife when kids are sick at his house. Dr. Adriana Vargas is an associate research professor for us here at NCAT. Her main areas of research have been pavement preservation and pavement management. She joined NCAT in 2016. Before that, she was a research professor in a civil engineering department at the University of Costa Rica, and she worked for the Nicholas Consulting Engineers in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's a member of AAPT, the International Society for Asphalt Pavements. She's on some TRB standing committees. She's part of the Emulsion Task Force, and she's part of the board of directors for the Southeast Pavement Preservation Partnership. Bobby Bestold is the Director of Marketing for All States Materials Group based out of Massachusetts. He is the current Vice President for FP Squared. He's the Vice Chair of the Northeast Pavement Preservation Partnership. He's a member of the AASHTO Emulsions Task Force, and he's also an instructor for the LTAPs, the Local Transportation Assistant Programs in the Northeastern United States. So I'm happy to have our group here with us. Today, I want to remind you a couple things. Please stay muted during the presentations. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. And then when we get through all of the presentations, then we'll divvy those questions up and we'll have our Q&A session. Given that, Nathan, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Travis. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Slides advancing?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. Happy Friday. This is the last time that we will be hosting our webinar series on a Friday. We'll be back to Thursday starting next month. So most of you know the drill, but those of you who are new to our implementation webinar, I'm going to give a very, very brief topic, introducing the topic and what NCAT has done from a 30,000-foot view related to pavement preservation. Then I'm going to kick it over to our expert, which is Dr. Adriana Vargas, and she knows way more about this than I do, and so she's an excellent presenter today. And then we're going to kick it over to industry and see how this stuff is being done in the field. Travis mentioned, please get your questions in, put them in the chat. Don't be shy. We really want engagement from these webinars. So if you've got questions, stick them in the chat. We may answer them on the fly, or we may save them for the end. So a very brief history of pavement preservation at NCAT. Honestly, going all the way back to 2003, when we put a 3/4 inch thin lay for Mississippi DOT out in section W6 on the test track. Currently, this has been it's experienced now. I know it says 60 here. It's actually over 70 million easels that test section has experienced, and it's still there. And the idea was, using local available material for thin lays, and it is one of our. I like to call it as something we didn't think would work but did, or something that shouldn't have worked based off of the knowledge at the time but did, and it's an excellent example of trying new things, seeing them succeed, and then changing specifications as a result of it. In 2012, we got into more thin lace, so 25% wrap, and that's been out there 30 million easels as well. So had really good performance from that as well, demonstrating you can use wrap and thin lace even up to 25%. We got into enhanced friction microsurfacing and a handful of different microsurfacing test sections, as well as like HFST stuff as well on the test track. But really, when our preservation research really took off was in 2012 when we built the low volume what we call them Lee Road 159. It's a county road that heads into it dead ends into a quarry, and there's a quarry and an asphalt plant out there. So we have unloaded trucks going in and loaded trucks coming out, and we've got partnerships where we can keep up with the traffic. Um, and we put a bunch of different test sections out there. And then in 2015, we partnered with Minroad to do some of this work also in northern climates. And also in 2015, we built preservation sections on high volume treatments. But both of these, the 2012 low volume and the 2015 high volume, both of these research experiments now have 10 plus years of data, and they're just incredible resources, not just for the NCAT and our researchers, but our sponsors, for the preservation community as a whole. It's been an excellent investment in research. Um, so yeah, so we are continuing to monitor these in our next steps. We've got high volume and low volume. We've got northern climates and southern climates and all the combinations. So high volume southern climate, high volume northern climate, low volume southern climate, blah blah blah. And so it's an excellent cross section of different climates that preservation may be needed, different traffic volumes that may be expected, so that DOTs or county engineers or municipalities or folks in industry can better select which treatments they think would best fit their needs. Um, we've done quite a bit of thin lay treatments on the test track since that 2003 test section, but I don't really want to talk too much about that. I want to be able to kick this over to Adriana and hear what she has to say specifically about research in an urban environment.
Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this topic, and specifically want to acknowledge the project where this information is coming from is a project that is funded by the Federal Highway Administration. And we have a nice research team that includes ERA, NCAT, we have Chico State University and the Transtech Group, all of us working together with the main objective of being able to summarize and synthesize all of this information into a document. A lot of this is not published. So we want to give guidance to agencies and industry on how to do this in an urban environment. The motivation for this is that, well, an urban road or an urban setting has elements that are not typically something that you see in the open highway or a rural environment. For example, curb and gutters or sidewalks. We have ADA ramps, signal loops. We have a lot more density of utilities. And these are elements that we have to be able to work around and to still construct a real good quality type of project when we do pavement preservation. So how to handle all of this, it's really what we wanted to do with this project, and being able to give, again, that guidance to the agencies. So with doing this, we know that we could be impacting vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, just the general public. Specifically, when we work in residential areas, it can become challenging. Businesses, so things that maybe were not as much of an issue in a different environment, they just become really important when we do something in an urban setting. And this could be something that we can again face and plan for, but we do have to know that it will have a significant effect on our work zone duration. Cost can be also impacted. There could be additional environmental considerations. So all of that is part of what we have to account for. And as I mentioned before, the majority of this information is not really published. We really had to rely on interactions with different agencies, and we talked about contractors, practitioners. So the main stakeholders that we interacted with here were the different regional payment preservation partnerships. We also went through the Committee on Payment Preservation for TRB, Payment Preservation and Recycling Alliance as well, industry, FP2. We talked to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So there's a lot of different folks from different perspectives that contributed to getting information here for this project. Overall, we did more than 20 interviews with some of these stakeholders. And what we talked about, first of all, we wanted to talk about treatment. So, is there anything that they simply do not allow or don't do because of an urban environment? Is there a most effective treatment that they use in urban areas? One of the most important things was what challenges do they face when they do payment preservation in that urban setting? Does that affect the selection process? What are the factors that would be coming into play and to what extent? And well, what mitigation measures are taken when we do something like this? Is there documentation? Are there any specific examples? So that we did a bunch of case studies, for example, to highlight these. And once we got all of this information, the main issues that we identified, I think the biggest thing was communication. So letting the public know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what to expect was very, very important for the success of the different projects. Then we have things like traffic control, especially if we have a very busy, dense urban area that really becomes key. Production rates can be affected, of course, because you have to deal with these other elements and maybe it requires more surface prep or anything like that that could affect your production rates. ADA compliance was a big factor. There are certain treatments that will require updates to your ADA ramps. However, it is identified as an issue, but really something that they just have to deal with. So if it requires more cost because you have to do all these upgrades, then so be it. But it is in there. And something that also got mentioned was personnel and resources shortage. So, not being able to have a consistent crew, that could affect some of the productivity in there. But I guess that's not necessarily exclusive to the urban setting, but it was something that got mentioned during our interviews. Some of the non issues, really nobody said explicitly that they will ban and treatment in an urban setting. There was more of a this is how we will deal with it or this is how we work around it, but not really that something wouldn't be done just because it was in an urban environment. And I'll go into that in a little bit more later. Noise, and this is noise during construction. Just adjust your working hours, air quality, and stormwater. That also wasn't really that big of a deal. Just deal with it. And cost, and I just want to say it's not that it's not a non-issue, it's just that people know that it may cost you more and you just have to plan for it. If you can bundle projects and have a good mix of urban and rural, that can help offset some of the increase in cost. So that goes in there. So I just want to mention some of the notable findings. There's a lot of information here and there's not enough time to go over everything, but I did want to point out some of the highlights here. So first of all is treatment selection. And this is just using your standard process, but also taking into account some special considerations. So you would, as you would with any normal preservation project, you want to start doing a detailed condition evaluation, a condition survey. Say if you use PCI or any other metric, you will go through accounting for the different types and severities of distresses that you have in your roadway. And then maybe do some non-destructive testing to look at functional and structural performance, like deflections or roughness or anything like that. Once you have completed that and you look at your whole network, you can develop a list of preliminary candidates for pavement preservation and look at that list and look at the pavement preservation toolbox that you have, or the tools in your toolbox, and see which treatments match what you have, showing us the condition of your payments. So which treatments will meet your needs. And then finally, look at those special considerations and see if there's anything that maybe you shouldn't be doing because it's the urban environment. So which one meets better your needs, and also work around all of these additional elements. So you want to incorporate things like cure time, for example. If you have a need for opening back up the traffic real quick, then you look for the treatments that give you that quick cure time. Geometry, do you have enough space for your equipment to maneuver and do what you want to do? Public perception can be important, and I'll go over that in a little bit. And once you look at all of those special considerations and your list of fixes and your alternatives, what is the most cost-effective option here? So there's things among those special considerations, traffic conditions, for example. If you look at traffic volume and then you want to see, for example, cure time. How does your treatment affect your street closures? Do you need to get something that it gets done pretty quickly? If you are in a high-speed area, then there's safety concerns. So for example, if you were to do a fog seal, you would know that you would expect to have a reduction in pavement friction initially that will get back to normal with time. But if this is a concern, then again, it's one of those special considerations that make you maybe move away from a certain treatment. I mentioned geometry and ability to maneuver and your productivity. Um, and this is a good one for the next slide. For example, a cul-de-sac. If you are doing a cul-de-sac, which is a very common element in urban areas, residential areas, then you need to have equipment that can go around the area. In this case, this picture is showing truck-mounted microsurfacing equipment versus the continuous, which is better for just an open roadway setting. In this case, you need to have enough room to work in your cul-de-sac. But then you're going to have a significant amount of handwork, and that can affect your productivity. Also, traffic control. So your residents that live in that cul-de-sac, they need to know what's happening, so they're not in the need of going in or out of their houses while this is happening. So communication is very important. Access to driveways, again, same thing. For public perception and user satisfaction, when we have treatments that result in a high texture, we could have more noise, which would not be something that you want to have in residential areas or areas where you have bike paths, for example. So the residents tend not to like that, and it's something that you should consider when making your selection. Also aesthetics, and this is an example for crack sealing. We ran into several agencies that do crack sealing, but they don't leave that as their final surface treatment. So they will seal cracks and then they come back and do a fog seal, or they do a chip seal, or a microsurfacing or slurry. So again, it's not that they ban the treatment, it's just that they work to combine it with something that works. Material selection, we want to do that according to the traffic and climate conditions that we have. When we talk about the aggregate, for example, and if we're doing chip seals or slurry surfacing systems, we would have coarser aggregate for higher traffic applications. It is more durable, but also gives you more macro texture, which again brings us back to it being more noisy and maybe a little bit rougher. If we were to consider things like bicycle traffic or anything like that. Something that we found in the literature is that if you can keep your mean profile depth to less than 2.5 millimeters, that helps mitigating those adverse effects from that higher microtexture. If what we're doing is thin overlays, well, we can do any kind of gradation. It can be dense, open, or gap graded. However, OGFC mixtures are not recommended if you have a high shear area, such as a parking lot or an intersection or ramp terminals, or if we're adjacent to the curb and gutter because of just that moisture getting accumulated in there. However, on the other hand, open graded mixes, if we're in a noise sensitive area, say around a hospital or a school or something of that sort, can really be helpful to mitigate noise from pavement traffic interaction, pavement tire interaction. Also in urban areas where we have a wrap surplus, they could be benefiting from using that wrap as an aggregate source. And this is a very common practice when we're doing asphalt concrete, but not so much with surface treatment. So there's a big push right now in using wrap and chip seals and microsurfacing, slurry seals, but there's really not a lot of guidance. So I know there's work being done to get in some guidelines to help with that, and they seem to be working successfully. It's just a matter of getting really some formal information out there. In terms of the asphalt binder, when we're talking emulsion treatments, for example, so our emulsion-based chip seals are not really suitable for intersections or high stress areas, but we could work with hot applied binders that enhance performance, and they can help us if that is what we have. If we have selected a chip seal and we have those elements, then hot applied binders might be better for that use. Also, they'll help opening traffic earlier, and we could apply them at cooler temperatures, which means we could be doing night work, which is really not something that is done when we're using emulsion-based chip seals. Also, the use of polymer modified emulsions in slurry surfacing systems can help us increase durability. This is especially important when we have areas that are susceptible to scuffing and power steering burns. We see a lot of that in the cul-de-sacs, for example. So when the vehicles are coming in and out of the driveways, there will always be some scuffing, which is normal. But if we're using high modified emulsion, that really helps offset those adverse effects even more. The use of polymer or rubber modified binders also for thin overlays is good if we're in a high traffic, high stress area, or we have a lot of potential for reflective cracking. So those are also parts of the material selection process. And also using warm mix asphalt technologies, again, for like the thin overlays that can help improve workability and compaction. And if we have done preliminary crack sealing, that can also help minimize any bumps when we're paving over that material. For the schedule, well, we know that if we're on a restricted schedule, that can increase the treatment cost up to 1.5 times. If we are obligated to do night work because that's the only time where you can do it in an urban environment, then you may not be able to meet some of the weather requirements. And that goes back to, well, I need to then select a treatment that I can do at night that can cure and get me everything ready to open back up to traffic. Other things that are important: trash pickup schedules, school drop off and pickup hours, any special activities. This picture here is from a project that we visited in a residential area. It was not planned to be happening on the day that it did. There was a rain delay, and they had to go the next day, which happened to be garbage pickup day. And you can see how the crews now had to spend additional time moving trash cans and all of that. So again, it just affects your productivity rates. Try to avoid that as much as possible. Surface prepping can be labor intensive. You have to cover manholes, utilities, mill and crack seal on gutter pans, protecting your stormwater inlets, and also removing thermoplastic pavement marking. So, because you have a lot more density of all of those things in that urban environment, that is something that, again, is going to affect your productivity rates. And finally, I want to go into notifications. This is very critical. This is something that everybody mentioned, and it's very important. It lays the foundation to the success of your project. You want to just make sure that your users are informed throughout the project. First of all, because it builds confidence in what you're doing, so your taxpayers know that you're using those resources efficiently, but also informing specifically about the process and setting the expectations and just letting everyone know how they're going to be affected, and try to, by doing that, minimize delays and complaints. So notifications happen throughout every stage of the project. So when you're in the planning stages, you just want to have that conversation with the community and explain what you're doing and why it's important. So you just be more general. You can be more general. Talk about just the current state of the network. What are the goals of your program? How you selected those projects and what's coming up and how to get in contact with you. You can do that through town hall meetings, press releases, social media posts, for example. As you're approaching the date of construction, you start to focus more on specific areas and targeting the communities that are going to be directly impacted. In this case, you want to let them know where you're working, so your project location, what treatments are going to be applied, and what is the construction sequence. Talk about the schedule, any traffic and parking restrictions, and again, give them contact information so they can let you know if they have any questions. At this stage, you will be placing flyers on the different businesses and residences, doing door hangers, yard signs, emailing HOAs, and again, continue with your social media posts. Now, as you're getting closer and closer to the project, you can put up your no parking signs 2 to 3 days before the work begins. And if there's any delays, you have to update all of that information, and provide the public with any other instructions like keeping your pets indoors or adjust your sprinkler schedule. If they have to drive slower, that's something that they need to know, and instructions like avoiding turning wheels while the vehicles are sitting still. And also have some expectations after work. So how does that impact your trash pickup and regular sweeping schedules? If there's going to be any loose rock, you just let people know that that's going to happen and when it's going to get cleaned up. If there's any changes in the appearance of the pavement or any cleanup activities that are going to happen, when the pavement's going to be restriped, all of those can be provided in flyers or posts or any other channels for information. And finally, reopening to traffic. So if we're talking about emulsion-based treatments, they are going to need time to cure, and that may depend on treatment type, pavement surface conditions, weather conditions. If we have areas with stop and go or turning traffic, driveways, cul-de-sacs, all of that, that may require additional time as well. If there is a need for traffic to go before we're completely cured, you could use blotter material so that you don't damage the treatment. So those are some examples. I'm not sure what's happening here. So our also pre-coated chip seal aggregates can help if we need to have quick time for curing and opening back up to traffic. We can also use the control amount of excess aggregate in areas where we have extensive stopping and turning movements. If you're in that urban environment, you want a vacuum sweeper just so that none of that excess aggregate gets pushed into the gutter pans or anything like that. So some of the final thoughts here. I know, again, it's a lot of information. We will have a report on this where we have summarized everything. But it's important to see that we can conduct our pavement preservation treatments successfully in the urban environment. If there's a challenge or a problem, there's always a solution. And it is very important to communicate with the public and let them know what's happening. We saw some agencies, and they would use, for example, cave seals. That was one of their preferred treatments. Chip seals were just too rough for the public to have, so they would come back with a microsurfacing or a slurry to be the final surface. But they had to really let the residents know we're doing this as a two-stage process. So don't worry. First, we're doing the chip seal. It's going to be whatever amount of time. Then we'll come back and resurface that. And you can expect that there will be loose rock, and we will have our work zone during the specified amount of time. So when people understand this, that just makes life easier for everybody. So communication is really important, again, throughout the whole stage of the process. And again, just looking at what you want to achieve and what tools you have to do it is also very important.
Great to hear that. I think a lot of what you're going to hear in my presentation on a couple of case studies and examples from the industry perspective, that we're all up against this across the country, and a lot of the common themes. So you'll see a lot of commonalities between the points that Adriana was making and what I'm going to hit here from the urban or from the Northeast kind of industry perspective with a couple of case studies. So with that, we'll jump right in. And I'm specifically going to kind of address, really, I'll call it the greater Boston area, where we're really working here in the Northeast. And when you look at what that area is, you can see the information there. But really, that greater Boston is expanded outside of just the confines of the city and really stretching even towards central Mass and down south and then up into New Hampshire, with a lot of very urban areas overall. Specifically today, gonna talk about two programs that have really come alive in the last 7-8 years in the Northeast that have been great examples of the success of pavement preservation in urban areas. With Newton there, you can see just under 90,000 in the population just outside the city, and then Arlington just north of the city, a little bit lower on the population size, but again into a very urban setting. Where we have a lot of those factors that Adriana had mentioned. So jumping in from there, I think a lot of these again line up to kind of summarizing, I think, what Adriana hit it well. The factors of what are the challenges that we face in an urban setting versus a rural setting or an interstate, and that. And first, and this is the biggest one I think we all see, is the traffic and the mobility, and kind of taking traffic beyond just the typical passenger vehicles, but getting into public transit and multimodal with bike and pedestrian, and how we deal with all of that, the variability that comes in with those, and then the congestion, those work hours that certainly come into play. We have a high congestion in the morning with people going to work and people going to school, pickups, drop-offs, and that. And then it may let up midday, and then the afternoon can spread out where you get a longer. So you start looking at how that impacts the work hours and what we have to do from a traffic management, a pedestrian management, in that regard, and how all that plays into the work that we do. From there, moving into the spatial constraints, where we have, again, so much of a high concentration of not just people, but activities. And things that are happening where you've got businesses and you've got emergency services and you've got residential and you've got schools, and the trash is a great one that a lot of people don't think of necessarily. It seems like no matter where you're working, what day you're working, it's always trash day. You can work in 5 towns in a week, different different town every day, and it always seems to be trash day in each of them. And so coordinating all of that into very tight spaces is very much something that comes into play. And then you get into the construction vehicles beyond just the impact on the construction work, but when we start talking about staging locations and where are we parking the equipment for overnight, where it's safe and it's out of the way and it's not going to create a hazard, where we can stockpile materials or get rid of excess materials, all seem to be challenges. Even something as simple as in a rural environment or off a highway project, there's typically never an issue of getting rid of millings and that, whereas in the urban environment, that seems to be much more of a challenge and little factors that can play into a project. Next, on the utilities, we certainly have that high concentration of the utilities, but then we get into a lot of different ownership and sometimes figuring out who is the owner of certain utilities. And if we have a lot of that consolidation that has happened, roadways may not have been touched or utilities may not have been touched for some time. And the ownership may have changed 2 or 3 times, and making sure that the proper organizations are in contact and coordinating the work that may or may not need to be done with those. Certainly anything from a regulatory restrictions, safety, all of those factors of not just then coordinating the project, but in that prep work stage and the work that goes into it, bringing multiple players together, which kind of leads into that next one, the logistical coordination. Inherently in the urban environment with that high concentration, with so many more activities and so many more organizations and things happening, there are so many more stakeholders. And that is a critical part, to be able to coordinate all of those stakeholders and make sure that we're minimizing the impact of the work on everybody. Because certainly, again, kind of like we get to that bottom one there, safety has to be the highest priority and always is. But we also need to figure out how can we get the work done in an efficient manner, in a productive manner, and in something that produces a good outcome for the agency. So I mentioned I'm going to hit on 2 programs at the high level and kind of use those as jumping off points to a lot of the work. So I'll start with Arlington. Arlington is just north of the city and high concentration of neighborhoods. A lot of people that work in the city or in around the city that will live up there. And this is an interesting one because they were actually a community that had done a tremendous amount of chip seal work with conventional chip seal back with cutback asphalts 20 plus years ago. And we're one of the largest chip seal communities in the region. And then there were some changes on the materials that were being used, things with emulsions coming into play, and the aggregates that were being used in conjunction with those. That led to issues around loose stone, broken windshields, stones in driveways and yards, and a lot of the issues and concerns that can come up sometimes with chip seals. And as a result of that, that ended their program. So for decades, really, chip seal was not an option, and the community really shifted towards the call it worst first, and rehabilitation, repair, and overlays were the major portion of their program, and then some usage of crack seal. They started to look at some preservation and a paved process with the use of the bonded wiring course in 2015, initially in neighborhoods. And I'll get to that in a moment. And then the ironic part is the chip seal program came back, or the chip seal treatment came back into play for them in 2016, because they actually had a cemetery that had been done over 20 years ago with chip seal and had not had any work done to it since. And they said, well, this has lasted for 20 plus years. Why don't we do the same thing again? So that kind of reopened the door for chip seal and the advancements that had happened, and building on the performance and conversation, they then did a trial of the asphalt rubber stress absorbing membrane, or the asphalt rubber chip seal that same year. That created the opportunity for them really to then springboard their program forward to where they now have an annual program over the course of a 3 to 5 year period. They shifted a lot of their maintenance dollars from that worst first approach and into a preservation focus. With some of the lessons learned, they really focused on the bonded wearing course application on their arterials and main drags, the higher volume roadways and higher traffic, and then consolidated that hot applied chip seal into their neighborhoods and coordinated working neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood. So going in from a mobilization, say we're going to do one neighborhood at a time and work our way through there. The biggest part, I would say, and this will be true for both of the case studies, has been the continuous modifications and changes to the program and the feedback, what we'll call the feedback loop. Right from day one, there was a lot on lessons learned each year. So upfront coordination and meetings together with the agency and with industry of what's working, what may not be in areas for improvement, and bringing all stakeholders to the table, again, where we have a lot of different stakeholders, both from departments within the community, business community, and others of what can be improved. And some of the examples in the Arlington program, and I know Adriana mentioned, in terms of that communication to residents was huge, and parking and making sure we had cars out of the way, and then into the making sure sprinkler systems were turned off. That was a significant issue early on. In neighborhoods, we run into where we have a lot of basketball hoops, portable basketball hoops that are in roads, or if someone's moving, making sure that the moving trucks are not going to be there, or dumpsters, all of those things that really emphasized into the communication. The other big one for Arlington was around that feedback of making sure that any of the stone that was there from the sweeping or the side, or may have gotten kicked onto curb ramps or otherwise, is having essentially a person working in conjunction with the sweepers. And that way that loose stone could be picked up and swept up or put back out into the sweeper path, anything that would kick to the side that wasn't swept up or backed up. So that was key to make sure that there wasn't that impact to the adjacent sidewalks, houses, driveways, otherwise, and was crucial in terms of the overall program. As a result of their program and their shift, one slide in between as I was talking through. So again, this just kind of shows some of the example roadways, as I was mentioning, on the neighborhoods with the rubber chip seal, and then on the bonded wearing course on the main drags, and what those applications are. But I was starting to say, this here kind of shows the success of their program and where they were prior to, and the majority of their funding focused on the kind of the worst first and overlay and rehab approach, with only some minor crack seal. Saw a significant decline in their overall PCI, and as they started to shift that program on a level funded budget, we're really able to access more roadways, more miles of roadway treated, and then with that to cause a significant bump in the overall condition of their network, and now continue to see that program develop and flourish as they move forward. So, this is I think a great example of an integrated program, the feedback loop, and a community that had gone away from preservation but was able to navigate their way back through a lot of that communication and coordination. Moving into another example on Newton. So Newton is a little bit closer to the city and also into urban, a lot heavier traffic in the areas that the program was working. Their program historically was similar on that kind of the rehab, repair, and overlays with some crack seal. In 2017, they did a survey of all their residents and about what the prioritization was and what residents wanted to see funding going towards. The roadways were ranked as number 2 in the overall. The schools there, as you can see, were number 1. And based upon that, they did a survey of their road network and started to come up with a plan for not only how would they increase their funding and dedicate more funds to the roadways, but realizing that just putting more money towards it wasn't the solution, and that they also needed to find ways to more effectively spend those dollars, and looking at some alternative treatments and trying to keep those good roads good. So they took the opportunity over a 3-year span to really try almost all of the tools in the toolbox, and look at what was going to work for them, for the roadways that they had, what was going to be the most effective. And I think this was a great approach for them to explore and see what was out there and see how it would perform, how it would fit within their network and within their roadways. And again, go to that feedback loop. It's really is the key for any program is, as you're trying things, be able to adjust and improve the program. So they've turned, starting in 2018, really have turned the bonded wearing course into the cornerstone of their pavement preservation program, and had started out as that preservation overlay. And based upon that success, looked at how could they utilize it in more opportunities in more ways and in conjunction with other applications. So that included a pretty unique application. They had around 10 miles of concrete roads in the city, and we're facing a challenge, an expensive challenge of rehabbing and repairing those or replacing them, ripping them out. Very time consuming, very costly. So through the usage of a combination of treatments, as you can see there, they've developed a preservation of those concrete roads that has performed very, very well, with the bonded wearing course being the top course. They've also used it in conjunction with their hot in place recycling program as the final surface on that. And then more recently, you've gotten into using it onto multimodal paths, an old carriageway right by City Hall that runs for several miles, and use the treatment in there as a way to minimize the overall profile impact of the roadway, and be able to apply it to a large stretch of road with minimal impact and a time constraint. And then that one note, as you see there, that photo and the article there on the right, of the placement of that concrete treatment actually on a section of the Boston Marathon route, where you come out of Wellesley after the famous hills of Wellesley, and intersecting with one of the very, very busy interstates that runs through the city. So, applications in very demanding situations that they've been able to utilize it. And again, some photos there. A few things that hit on this. So that top left is a great example of where we have a high concentration of things happening in a very dense area. That application in 2019 was right in front of the busiest firehouse in the city. And as would be expected, because, why wouldn't it be? Not long after that photo was taken, actually less than a minute after, full alarm fire. And all the fire trucks out over top of that application, over top of that surface, and with the benefits of the quick application process and the minimal impact, that was able to happen and not impact the response on the emergency services. Similar, we see a night application through a downtown on the bottom left there, and then as moving through the center bottom photo, the concrete, that's the section of the marathon route. And then the right two photos there, those different applications. One is a surface over the hot in place, and then onto the multimodal carriageway. So Newton has really done a great job of finding ways to utilize a treatment that's worked for them and use it in multiple applications, and leverage that success that they've had with their program to be more effective and efficient going forward. And one quick slide there on that concrete program that they developed, and kind of showing an example of the before and after. So without having to remove any of that material than a surface mill, whereas before they were going in and completely removing all of that, excavating out all of that concrete and getting into utilities and everything. This is a much quicker process, much more cost effective for them, and has really allowed them to address many more of those concrete roadways in a very short period of time in a cost effective manner, utilizing a combination really of different preservation treatments in a unique application. So I do have a couple quick slides, about the two treatments specifically that I mentioned there, but I know we want to keep in mind here everyone's time. So real quick, really it's the asphalt rubber chip seal, stress absorbing membrane process. So you can see there what that process is versus the emulsion application. So very similar on an outward look, but material differences that allow it to have the benefit of really a quick return to traffic because of that immediate sweeping. Also with higher application rates, allows into some higher traffic volumes and more demanding situations. And similar there when I talk about the material differences and the application differences, kind of the typical in the Northeast between that a conventional emulsion chip seal versus what you would see on the hot applied asphalt rubber treatment. So certainly a difference significantly in the type of materials, the quantity of materials, a higher cost, but a much more rugged material, a much more higher performing application. And really, we've seen in the Northeast a shift, especially in the urban, but really across the board, from a lot of the emulsion applications over to the hot applied asphalt rubber, with one of the biggest reasons being that same day sweeping and minimizing that impact of the loose stone. And then similarly, the bonded wearing course, just giving a brief overview of that application. Again, lending itself to the urban setting because of that quick process, the minimal impact to traffic, the minimal impact to curb reveal and structures, and so many of these different items that Adrian and I have mentioned. That middle photo there is actually going right by a Starbucks. In the Northeast, as I think a lot of parts of the country, if you get between people and their coffee at rush hour in the morning, it's sometimes not a pretty sight. But the impact and the traffic stop for cars going into that parking lot was a matter of a couple minutes, and being able to allow that traffic to get on the surface very quickly, in and out, and minimize that impact is a huge benefit overall, and something that we've certainly seen on an urban setting have that major benefit. And then again, kind of comparing the thin overlay, traditional thin overlay, versus that bonded wearing course of what the materials are, what the applications are, and when you see that thin application, that quick return to traffic, in a lot of cases where you do have good solid base and materials, being able to use that application provides an opportunity to have that additional tool in the toolbox. And then I certainly don't want to discount a lot of the other treatments have been utilized throughout the Northeast and that greater Boston area. The photo on the right there is actually the town of Lexington, Mass, not far outside the city. It was a Sorensen Award winner for their pavement preservation program, and utilizing a lot of these different treatments that are on there. So there has been a lot of use throughout the Northeast on different treatments and different applications within the urban setting. How that's all happened, and wrapping things up, is a lot of the points that Adriana had mentioned. Right up front, like anything, is project selection is key. That right treatment at the right road at the right time, nothing replaces that. And it's bringing in all of the different factors, that the additional factors of the urban area. And I think having a clearly defined scope as we expand what's involved, more prep work, more responsibilities, expectations, in that regard also is key. And that plays into the communication factor, first between the contractor, the agency, and the other departments within the town, but then that push out to the residents, to the driving public, and everyone that's involved and potentially impacted, because there is so much greater impact from a volume and from a high concentration of everything in there. And then that traffic control just comes into play so much more, so much additional that's involved, being able to pivot on the fly. And I really stress the key on that is that urban paving, urban preservation, urban chip sealing, urban anything, it's not the same as working on a highway. It's not the same as working in a rural or a state numbered route. And having the experienced crews, having the people that are doing it, and the supervision and the traffic control, it is really critical in the overall phase and performance and success of it. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity, and I will turn it back over to Nathan for taking us here with some questions.
Very good. All right. Well, I'll just summarize what Adriana and Bobby talked about. That was really helpful. Kicking off, understand local expectations. From both of our presenters, it seems like whenever you are working in an urban environment, there are local requirements that you need to know, but also expectations of, people want to be able to drive in and out of their driveways. Lots of things like that. And so communicate. I thought that was a really good point that both of our presenters made. Select treatments, obviously, based off of existing conditions. The right treatment for the right time. Like that's sort of a great motto to have. But consider special considerations. Things like cul-de-sac geometries or traffic and curing times. I thought the emphasis on garbage trucks was really helpful. Or even the example about treating a road in front of a fire station. You need to have something that cures rapidly in order to do that. Otherwise, there's a very high chance that you're going to be going back over it and doing it again. Communicating with users, again, this is kind of it was a very consistent theme throughout both of our presenters. But to avoid issues, so things like public services, uh, school buses, trash trucks, fire services, things like that. Yard maintenance. Honestly, that was something that took me by surprise. I never would have thought about having uh, asking your residential folks to turn their sprinklers off to avoid issues with materials. That was a really good point, and I think it highlights as a great example the special considerations that come from working in urban environments. Consider new technologies. So we heard a little bit about asphalt rubber. Adriana talked about including wrap in preservation treatments. Um, whether from uh, helping on the economic side or on the performance side, or maybe both, um, see how you can benefit from new developments and new technologies. And then finally, construction and speed and curing time speed, it seems to be essential in urban environments. You make sure that you've got the appropriate material selected for the job and notice ahead of time if you're going to need to be able to get in and out of something quickly to avoid delays. So I do want to just extend one more thank you to our speakers, to Adriana and Bobby. And at this point, we'll turn it over for questions.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Couple questions came in, and I've got a couple that I've gathered up here as well. One of them that I think is interesting that I want to bounce to both Adriana and to Bobby here is there any sort of a general guidelines or a table that can be used for curing times before we open traffic for the different preservation treatments?
I think with that one, as with everything, the answer is it depends. Because especially for your emulsion-based treatments, they're highly dependent on the environmental conditions or the weather conditions. But typically for these treatments, we're talking few hours, so maybe 1 to 3 hours. It also depends on the level of traffic that you have. So if it's low volume traffic, you're maybe able to get away with it sooner rather than later. I don't know, Bobby, in your experience, if you have anything else that to add, but yeah, typically we're talking few hours.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the emulsion treatments are really where that comes into a significant play because of the curing versus the thermoset. And I've seen, I say I've seen a fog seal that's set up in 15 minutes and is fine. And I've seen them that they've been 3 hours where, you're in a shaded area or otherwise. And it even comes down to where if you've got tree canopy that covers a small portion of the road, the rest of the road may be cured, but that area that's canopied may not. So certainly on the emulsion, less of an issue on anything that's a thermal set. And that's again where we've seen a lot of the transition from emulsion to hot applied for that reason, specifically in the urban settings.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's one of those things too that depending on how your contract is set up with somebody that's putting down especially a micro or a slurry, you can have some discussions with your contractor about using additives to make it set quicker. I know with some other work that Adriana and I did, I went out and visited a night project and sampled some microsurfacing, and it set up almost immediately in the pan where we were trying to sample, where the next day I took some in the 90-degree heat in the southeast or southwest, really dry, arid climate, and it took me an hour to get that stuff to set up. So it had to do with that curing compound that was, or additive that was put in there. I also want to point folks that are interested in, trying to find some more of that guidance and guidelines, that SHRP 2 R26 document is a really great document that's put together. It's guidelines for preservation on high traffic volume roadways. And there's some great tables and whatnot in there to help with this kind of thing. Another question I want to really push this one towards you, Bobby, is when using the asphalt rubber stress absorbing membrane, and some of those rubberized chip seals that you guys have used, what's been your experience when you mill that up and the recyclability of the wrap that has that rubber membrane in it?
So really no significant impact, the same whether it be the rubber chip seal or into rubberized mixes. In that it's a modified mix. I will say, it is a little bit, if you go to try and put a coring rig into a rubber mix or things like that, it does gum up a little bit. But really in the grand scheme, as you blend it in, it's no different than if you have crack seal and layers of roadway or otherwise from a milling perspective. And so once it gets in and recycled back into the process, is not a problem in an overall usage.
So do you see chunks of that come up like with crack seal? Sometimes we'll see chunks of that come up in the millings that may or may not slip through the plant, and then your recycled mix has that chunk. Do you see that with any of the rubberized mixes?
So you can get a little bit of it, especially if you get a high concentration in an area. A lot of times this will end up getting mixed in. You wouldn't go in and mill off just that chip seal layer where you do have the high concentration. It typically would end up being part of a bigger project. So
Yeah.
it'd be part of multiple layers where it would. But certainly anytime you introduce that the same way as polymers, you can get a little bit more that stickier, like you said, can happen.
Cool.
And that's where the quality control, when you get into the usage of the wrap, comes into play.
Great. Another question that got here is Adriana and Bobby, both of you on this one here. What have you found has been the most effective public notification method to make sure that the public's informed as we come into an urban environment, to make sure that we don't get them driving over these brand new treatments before they're ready, or they're not somehow interfering, leaving cars parked, and et cetera?
From our conversations with the different contractors and agencies, I think, well, there's a lot of use of social media right now because that's kind of where people go. They're still using the flyers and mailers, but there was always someone who would be like, "Oh, yeah, this is trash." Um, I think the meetings with the HOAs and targeting specifically the area, I think that's very effective. But yeah, I think we're transitioning more towards the online resources, probably.
Great. Bobby, what have you found has been most effective?
Yeah, and I would add to it, all of those, as Adriana mentioned, is the other one we've seen, especially in the high volumes, is still the message boards. The variable message boards have been key because a lot of times you have people that are just driving through in these areas, these urban areas, especially. So they may not live there and, may not get the flyers or see the meetings or otherwise. So having those up, if it's a route that someone travels every day, they've got that message board out there for a week in advance, letting them know. That's been effective as well.
Yeah. And I'm hearing a different little bit of a situation between the two of you. It sounds to me like some of the stuff Adriana's talking about there is more residential urban, and some of the stuff, Bobby, you're talking about is more commercial urban. And I think that's important, that distinction is that the same messaging doesn't work for both of those. So really like that. All right, that's the questions that we have gathered up here. As we kind of move forward, we always want to invite you to look at our website at ncat.us. There's a tremendous amount of research in there that you can go through and find and see what works for you. Always invite people to check out our Training in Your Pocket YouTube channel. There's a lot of great videos in there that are just little snippets, 3 to 5 minutes long, that cover different asphalt testing or equipment or different items that way. And then certainly want to welcome you back next month. Next month, we're going to have our implementation webinar on July 17th. That's Thursday. We'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming time. The topic is going to be full depth perpetual pavements used in HMA. And so we've had some perpetual pavements discussions in the past. we've kind of got a two-part series that Nathan and I have lined up here, where we're going to talk about using full depth HMA for 1 month, and then the next month we're going to talk about using some co-recycling or alternative base layers in there. So, any last words, Nathan?
Nope, it's a great webinar. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Adriana.
Okay, I want to echo that. Thank all of our presenters for being here. I appreciate everybody participating, and we will see you guys next month.